Welcome to Catastrophes. This is a podcast about disasters, why disasters happen, and the factors that make them happen. We discuss the underlying conditions to why disasters happen. And today we have a really interesting episode about wildfires in remote regions and tough to get to places. My name is Brady Podlowski. I am your host, and I had the pleasure of interviewing Nick Mauro, who is a rural wildland firefighter in the Yukon in Canada, and we had a really interesting conversation about the future of wildland firefighting and how we are going about managing prolonged wildfire season over the course of months instead of our usual short sprints. So I hope you're able to enjoy this episode as much as I enjoyed this conversation. And the intent of exploring today's topic is not to demean or diminish the experiences of people who have faced these difficult and devastating wildfires across Canada, but rather explore, question, critique, and ask why these are happening the way they are, and why and how we can improve processes and whatnot. So with that, let's begin. Nick, welcome to the show. We are really excited to have you. This series of the future of mountain living is really, the thought of it was, how are we going to respond to, manage, mitigate, recover from all of these different kinds of disasters that are happening in our mountain regions? And you have such a fascinating background and what you do on a day-to-day living in the Yukon. I'm very excited to hear your perspective on a whole bunch of topics we have today lined up. So before we go into those, can you introduce yourself? Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Brady, thanks so much for having me. Really excited to be here. My name's Nick Mauro. I'm the current acting CEO for Yukon First Nations Wildfire. I do want to say before I start off any further is that I am coming to you from the traditional territory of Kwanlin First Nation and the Tonquaton Council. And I'm privileged to live and work here on their beautiful traditional territories here in Whitehorse, Yukon. I was born here, lived here all my life. I've been lucky enough to get out for a bunch of traveling and some school, and I played a bunch of hockey growing up, and there's not that very many teams up here. So we had to travel 12 to 14 hours by bus to the nearest city, part of being in a remote community. So I have been outside, but I always ended up coming back here to the Yukon. For those who haven't been, man, it's something. It's beautiful. There is nothing but nature everywhere, as far as the eye can see. Just swaths and swaths of beautiful forests, deciduous mixed with the boreal forest. If you're ever able to get up into the air, whether by float plane or helicopter, hugely suggest that you do, because it's absolutely something to behold.
You work for Yukon Tourism too? Is that what's going on?
I just love where I live. I'm pretty patriotic, both in terms of the my country as well as, but Yukon is a special place. It took going away to really appreciate it. Coming back home now, and after being here all these years, compared to being in some of the jungles, the urban jungles down south, it's nice to get out. It's a little bit slower pace. There's a lot of really cool opportunity up here, and some of that opportunity I've taken advantage of over the years, to both in the emergency response and emergency management industry, to get to where I am. A little bit of hard work also has helped, but overall, it's a really cool place. Pretty unique for the size of the population that we have, and kind of the space and the area that it covers.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much terrain, and then a population like around 30,000 people for all of the central part of Yukon, correct? Or
Correct. Yeah.
more than that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think for central now, we're just Whitehorse is just over 25, between 25 and 28,000, and then I think there's another 10,000 kind of spread out throughout the rest of the Yukon. But if you're looking at land mass, comparatively, we're bigger than BC that way, and the population size versus that is it's quite different. And I mean, that extends to everything, all the different industries, government, tourism, and then of course the emergencies that happen up here.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So speaking about emergencies, I know you guys have been going through a little bit of the fire season already. Have you been a part of any of the fire responses this season so far, or have there been any notable ones the last few years that you can talk about?
Yeah, so I mean, so far this season, I haven't been called out to the line. I'm in a position now, um, behind the desk. I put out a different type of fire on a day-to-day basis, but I definitely got my experience coming up from boots on the ground, and was able to be on a bunch of different incidents, most notably 2017 and 2018 in
Mm,
the
nice.
Caribou region in British Columbia during
Mm,
some of those complex fire situations. Those were crazy. Huge amount of learning experience, both working with international resources, the military, RCMP, other First Nation resources, other government resources. Being in evacuated towns and being the only people in these normally large and bustling communities, is pretty eerie, and it still gets me when you have military checkpoints to be able to get into a city, and then everywhere is deserted and there's just smoke in the air. It's kind of crazy. I know there'll be a lot of other people who can relate to it. I
mm,
still think it's yeah, it blows my mind still, but it also really instills a sense of pride knowing that we're there to help and help protect and help make sure that people can get back to their businesses and to their homes. So yeah, the Caribou region, for 2017, 2018, 2019, even there was some stuff happening there. BC,
yep.
always
Oh yeah.
always on fire, it seems. And then through in 2021, I was really privileged to be able to be a part of a Yukon contingent from First Nations Wildfire who went down to help with the atmospheric flooding. We were brought
Oh.
on by the First Nations Emergency Services Society of BC. That's
Hmm.
their acronym is FINESS. They're huge, really good people. They've expanded a lot lately, and they brought 20 of us down to help, and we kind of spread out throughout the province. Some of us were in Kamloops, that's where I was
Oh.
based. Some of us went down to the island, and then some of us were over kind of just like outside of Vancouver and around the surrounding areas. And we were able to work on many different things there. So like the group that I was a part of in Kamloops, we helped outlying First Nations communities that had been hardest hit by the flooding with a bunch of recovery strategies, and help them kind of take those next steps. Where are they going to find the funding? What is absolutely necessary to do now? What could be put
Yep.
off for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 3 months, etc., and kind of like just help align people. um, and that was a really new experience for me because my most of my experience to that point had been really response based. So jumping straight into not that was different, but really eye opening, and
Hmm.
kind of equally as rewarding in some ways. And for those who have the opportunity, maybe if you've focused on one of those pillars and kind of haven't dabbled in the other ones,
Yeah.
maybe not for lack of opportunity, but really felt like you really were enjoying that one, I would highly recommend, yeah, getting into another area and trying to
Yeah.
see where those
Absolutely.
crossovers are, where that overlap is, because it not only will help you as an emergency manager, as a responder, but you might find that maybe you like it more even, and
Hmm.
it's really really interesting that way.
Yeah, and there's so much overlap with preparedness, mitigation, recovery, response. And when we think about the things that we're doing really well in preparedness, some of those things really help us during recovery as well. There's quite a bit of overlap. So I totally agree with your point.
You're completely right. And like when I was in school, learning about how they all overlap, my professor really related it to kind of like that Venn diagram where you have
Of
all of
course.
those overlapping circles. But the more that I'm in the industry and the more that I work with Indigenous peoples here in the Yukon and
Mhm.
governments and everything, I truly believe that those all those circles are just getting closer and closer and closer
Yeah.
together until eventually everything is both preparedness, mitigation, response, and recovery. Like
Yeah.
it's all there at some point, and can be actioned appropriately.
Yeah.
And that's why part of it's really, I mean, there's some really large frustrations around people who, or not just people, but
Hmm.
organizations, governments, groups, NGOs who silo everything
Yeah.
so like so acutely. So you can only do response, or you can only do recovery, and
Hmm.
maybe people don't pay attention to those as much because it's so siloed.
Hmm.
But I digress.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
another side of things for sure.
Totally. Yeah. We could keep going into that conversation. And I think that's a really nice segue into probably the things that you have found relevant or have learned in your journey that help you in your response focus in the Yukon, where resources are not plentiful. There's a little bit of isolation. So really the topic I wanted to focus on today was wildfires and fires, because the Yukon is just so vast, and the mountains themselves pose this great, sometimes barrier, maybe opportunity for some. But I would really like to just hear your general thoughts. Have you taken anything from, the preparedness, the recovery, the mitigation, and been able to implement it in like the response to wildfires?
Yes, is the very short answer. And there is so much more to it. I think that, as I mentioned before, the living in the Yukon and like the response that we do up here is different in that we do have such limited resources and limited capacity relative to the rest of like a bigger organization south of our border. So when we are preparing to respond, preparing an operation, or going into a community to help strategize on how they can best recover from any given situation, whether that was, the pandemic, floodwaters, wildfire evacuations, whatever that is, being extremely mindful about what the operations logistical requirements are and what resources are needed, and double checking, triple checking, quadruple checking your bag and your gear before you go into these communities, before you start those operations. Because as I was mentioning before, we're so spread out. It's not like oh, I forgot, the laptop or the hard hat or the pump, or insert here, I'll just go back and get it, or I'll get somebody else to bring it out who's coming out behind me. There really is a lot, there isn't that much of that at all. And if there is, it's kind of like it could take a day to do.
Yeah.
It could, your resource, your ride, if you're flying into an event like via rotor pardon me, via helicopter or via rotor wing, when you're going into a wildfire event, um, that that ride and that transport and that resource maybe just tasked with dropping you off, and then maybe directed or diverted elsewhere,
Yeah.
where it's needed in the complex, and you don't have the option to get whatever it is you did forget. So going back to what I was saying, it's really important for us to really try to plan out everything that we need and make sure that we have it with us. And if we don't have it with us, what can we then pivot to? Bringing things with you that that serve multiple purposes, and you have that experience serving multiple purposes, making sure that not only you are reviewing your kit or the operation, but the person next to you is reviewing it, the person above you, the person below you, really sharing it, making sure that that communication is all around and everyone is aware, because we need the most minds thinking about these things as possible to be able to suggest those things that we forget, and to look out for each other, honestly.
Yeah, that there's so many points that we can draw from all of that. So I mean, just walk me through, how does a deployment look in the Yukon? Like, are we talking people arrive at an airstrip, or depending on where it is? Just walk me through how you would typically see that go out.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, our fire system works very similar to other places around Canada.
Mm,
We have different crews. We have initial attack crews, which are the first on scene. They're the ones who try to put the fire out within the first, 48 to 72 hours. They try to get there immediately before it grows and in size and overwhelms the initial resources. If it does do that, which sometimes is totally beyond the control of, anybody who's attacking the fire. It could be
yep.
you could have the most experienced crew in the world jump out there, but wind, weather, topography, just whatever delays get you out there, it's going to jump and it's just going to the fire is going to grow. So at that point, in theory, what happens is we put sustained action crews on, so unit crews, usually about 20 people per crew, and those crews come in and try to take care of the fire and let the initial attack crews go back to base and get ready to jump on those other quick starts. So you have your initial attack, which is your
Wow.
sprinters, and then
Mhm.
your sustained action or unit crews, which are your kind of your marathon runners.
Wow.
So that's kind of the system that we play within. Again, similar to many other parts of Canada. What isn't as similar to other parts of Canada is that in the Yukon, as I was mentioning in the intro, swaths of forest everywhere. It's beautiful, but as anyone knows who's been in wildfire or the industry, forest equals fuel, and fuel can burn.
Yeah.
So when we're out there, there's just so much opportunity and potential for a wind event to come through, and what you thought was safe is immediately not. We've seen fires make 40-kilometer runs in a couple of hours here, which is due to these really high intense winds that come through our valleys
Yeah.
based on these really big mountainous regions that we're in. So you have these big mountains on both sides and then this really lush green valley down below, and as soon as that wind picks up, there goes the valley.
Wow.
So I would say the wind events up here, based on the mountainous terrain, is pretty unique and something I've seen elsewhere, and definitely occurs elsewhere. But up here, you really have to be mindful of it. The second thing that I'd like to touch on is the lack of resources, meaning in the sense that other places around Canada really, they'll go exploring for their natural resources. So
Mm,
whether that's wood, lumber, timber, or natural gas, oil, or other sorts of mining. So people will punch in road access roads,
yeah.
and there'll be a lot of ways that you can get to places that up a mountainside or
Yeah.
up a hill or just generally around. We don't have as many of those up here in the Yukon. We don't see those
Mm,
roads that much. If they're at most, you'll sometimes see an old cut line or an ATV trail, or maybe something that's an animal trail, something that's used in the winter, but it's really not, to this, the infrastructure is significantly
yeah.
less than what we see down south. So in saying that, um, we use helicopters to go everywhere up here
Oh,
for our fire response. You can often get to, or a lot of fires that we don't let burn. So we have a bunch of different zones up here in the Yukon, and our wilderness zone is so much bigger than others around Canada because,
mhm.
again, our population doesn't exist in the forest or
Yeah.
way deep in the forest. And so we let a lot of things burn comparatively to British Columbia, where
Yeah.
when things are burning, people are losing money. So
Yeah.
there's a lot more action taken right away to put those fires out. But up here, we let a lot of things burn. But
So,
again, it's hard to get to places, so we
yeah.
use helicopters a lot.
Yeah. So let me recap so I understand correctly. With the limited critical infrastructure with roadways, getting up the sides of mountains, that really hinders a lot of how you tackle any sort of wildfire first, but then also the accessibility to and from those those large events that could just grow so quickly. So are you guys being really thoughtful and like tactful when you pick the fires that you're going to be taking down, or is it's going to be coming towards the city, so I need to we need to put be in place?
Yeah, I'd like to say both of those things are action, and the preparation for those is key up here. So in
Mm,
when I say there's no, like I was saying before, like really trying to prepare for an event or for an operation, we call it district orientation up here. DOs going out for a DO, learning where you are and what could happen in those areas, and kind of mentally preparing for those events ahead of time. So you're if you have the ability to, you're up in the air, you're looking at the different mountain ranges, you're looking at the fuel
mm,
types, you're looking at the topography, you're kind of imagining certain situations, you're talking with your crew leader, you're talking with other crew members and other fire officers and people who've been in the game for a while, and saying, hey, like, I see down there's an old burn, what was the fire activity like there, what happened, why did it stop there, what did you have to do? And you're going through all these situations in preparation for that next one that happens. Obviously, no two are exactly alike, but we can
yeah.
always pull similarities and try to learn from those.
Wow. Yeah. No, that's brilliant. So, given all this isolation you've talked about, when there is perhaps like a supply delay or somebody does lose out on a supply, like what are we doing? Are
Totally. Oh
Yeah.
man, yeah, it happens to everybody all the time. And I shouldn't say all the time, but everybody has been through it,
Yeah.
and it sucks. It's the most embarrassing thing, especially when it's something as simple as forgetting your hard hat.
Hmm.
You've worked for 3 months straight, and you're tired, and for whatever reason that morning it just doesn't make it into your day bag or something, and then you get to the site and the helicopter's left, and you're getting your water or whatever, and yeah, it's something essential. um, but we move on. The thing that we do,
Mm,
which I'm a super big proponent of up here, is we teach our people as much as we possibly can in as many different ways as we can. We have to be as specialized and as knowledgeable about our equipment and about our operations as possible, because we don't have different teams coming in to do specialized activities.
of
All
course.
of the crews out there are trained should be trained to the same level or as much as possible, and are able to work with each other and feel like a big team out there, because we don't have those specialized crews coming in. And if something breaks, we aren't able to just switch it out or swap it out. If a pump goes down, you can't just get a new one sent out. You need to action that on the spot. You need to know small engine mechanics. You need to understand that your pump head is taking in too much air or too much water, or maybe it was your fuel mixture that had some water in it, or maybe it was too high in oil, or whatever the situation is. You have to be able to troubleshoot
Mm,
that on the spot and feel confident that you can do so. And also,
wow.
further to that, be able to make the call of, no, this problem, like, is either too difficult for me to solve,
Mm,
or I can assess that this piece of equipment is dead, like,
yeah.
without spending another hour on it where you could be used elsewhere. So finding that line and walking between those things is is tough, and it takes a lot of experience and a lot of time to be able to accomplish properly. But that's the goal for us up here. You need to be able to Frankenstein
Mm,
different pieces of equipment together to get the job done. You need to realize that plan A isn't going to work, and neither is B through F, and pivot to your next one, and not feel bad about that, and not feel like you're failing because of that, and not relying, and not kind of getting down on yourself or the team around you. Right?
yeah.
You could make
Absolutely.
an awesome plan at the base. You have your sand table, and it looks great, and everything's dialed up, and the paperwork's good to go, and you've got your weight set for your
Mm.
initial attack load, and everything's good. And then you get to the site, and that all goes out the window. And you really have to be prepared to take that on the chin and just say, you know what? Where do we go from here?
Wow.
How do we move forward properly, given the resources that we have, and understanding that everybody has to come home at the end of the night? So is moving forward even the best step right now, or do we pull out? Is this
Mhm.
as far as we go? Getting to a pad on the side of a mountain, and after having surveyed where the fire is, and then you try to find a place to land, you try to find your water source, you make all those assessments, you know, things can change so drastically in 5 to 10 minutes. Once you actually get out of the helicopter, you have to really make another assessment, and again, make sure that the top of mind is the safety of the crews. So sometimes the best assessment from there is to get out.
Yeah, wow. You're always on go mode, right? You're analyzing everything all the time. That's interesting. And I think the biggest takeaway from what you just said is how versatile your folks are. And obviously you, of course, right? But like
We
being
try.
able to go into a situation, pivot once, twice, maybe three times, but then equipment breakdown, constantly making decisions. So how big are the teams that are being dropped off by helicopters, and kind of run me through the motions of how long does it typically take the average deployment from helicopter to check down?
Oh man, that's a great question, and that is so nuanced. I don't know that I can give you an average, just because every situation is so unique,
Yeah,
and you have to really be wary of every kind of like little thing. But I can definitely walk you through the steps. So,
yeah.
so like there's different alerts that initial attack crews sit on. Red is the highest, and then there's yellow, blue, and green being the lowest. And so each one of those alerts stipulates how much time you have to respond to the emergency or to the fire. And so there will be a helicopter waiting for the first out initial attack crew. And then those alert systems stipulate how much time you basically have to get to the helicopter. With people being on red alert, being you have under 2 minutes to get inside the helicopter and take off. So at that point, all of your gear is packed. You're all ready to go. You're basically just sitting in the shade, waiting for that call to come in. And as soon as that happens, you're walking out to the helicopter, strapping in, taking off. Pardon me. And from there, it really just depends on where the fire is in relation to where you're taking off from. So some of the communities have. I was mentioning before that there's zones that we've set here in the Yukon around communities and critical infrastructure,
Hmm.
and those zones dictate when when and how fire is actioned. So our
The trigger
critical.
points too. Yeah,
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly. And if a fire could start in the wilderness zone and it's burning and it's burning, it's burning, but it's going to be encroaching on another zone, where there's more values, more VARs, values at risk,
Hmm.
whether that's cabins, lodges, specific areas that have been deemed necessary, to whomever. Mining areas, can be a whole swath of different things. But depending on where that fire starts and depending on where you're taking off from, it could take anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes to half an hour to 45 minutes just to get to the fire before you make your fire assessment. And at that
Wow.
point, you're flying, you're making circles around the fire. You're looking. You have a little booklet with you, and
Hmm.
you're going through. Uh, I think there's 20 so different questions that you're relaying back to the fire center as a crew leader to tell them what sort of fire it is and what your general plan is for attacking that fire.
Wow. Wow. Great information. You know what? Like, there's just so much that you guys do as firefighters that I think the regular person just doesn't understand how complex it really is, and the steps that you're taking, walking through. So, I mean, brilliant breakdown. I
Thank
want
you.
to, yeah,
I do want to say that
yeah.
my time in the initial attack was limited, and I spent more time on in sustained action with the unit crews. And there's phenomenal firefighters out there, far better than me, even here right here in the Yukon today, who work for our organization and who work for our partner organizations, who are amazing crew leaders, and they are the ones out there doing the work. And I'm lucky enough to be in a position where I can support the crews and help the crews get what they need, within the organization. But there's far more experienced and qualified people out there really doing the hard work right now. And yeah, I really want to thank them for that, and just say that, yeah, I'm jealous that they get to fly around in helicopters.
Yeah, they got the pretty job, I guess you could say. Hey.
Getting paid to fly around in a helicopter is one of the sweetest things that I can think of.
Yeah, you got to take your wins where you can. So
Exactly.
I wanna pivot the conversation just a little bit from fires to floods, and you've seen your fair share of floods within mountain areas, and I mean we can talk a little bit about like the science another time of how when large swaths of rainfall come on the sides of mountains, well, it's always going down like gravity kind of you know, always leads to. And I suspect that floods in the Yukon are a pretty big challenge for you. Um, how do you go about, preparing both fires and floods?
Yeah, I can definitely speak a little bit to that. I do want to say that the experiences that I've had up here with flooding haven't come from mountainous regions so much,
Hmm,
just because the communities that are around the Yukon don't have massive mountains beside them that have the like reservoirs, or the don't all the melt isn't going to impact that community necessarily coming off of the mountain.
hmm,
Here it's really the things that we worry about is rising rivers, and the lakes from all of that melting in parts of the Yukon and parts of BC. I have experienced some pretty intense, um, as I was mentioning in BC in 2021 with the atmospheric rivers. There was some very intense things happening on the mountains, and I can speak to that a bit. But yeah, here in the Yukon, it's really been rising rivers and rising lakes. Again, those are, and it's so different, lakes and rivers versus what happens coming down the mountain.
of course.
Equally as or maybe not equally as dangerous, but still dangerous in kind of
Hmm.
a longer, more drawn out sort of way. The damage can be just kind of, again, different, longer and drawn out. But yeah, like you say, a bunch of water plummeting downhill from 30 feet, or pardon me, 3 or 4 thousand feet up is super, super intense, and so much different than what you see in the flatlands.
Yeah, for sure. So when it comes to response for you folks, how does that look compared to a wildfire?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting you asked that question, because we train our crews, as I was mentioning before, we have to be ready for everything. So
Mhm.
we take a multi-hazard approach for
Nice.
our crews. We When we're training them on fire response, we are also training them on flood response. So our company's training weeks, or we call it, we have a program we call Beat the Heat, and it certifies you to become a firefighter. But during that training, we also touch on flooding, because it is, we need to be able to respond to both. We touch on a bunch of different things: fire smart, fuel mitigation, floods, wildfires, some search and rescue techniques, and a bunch of different things, things that we have the opportunity to be called out for here in the Yukon. Again, because you can't just say, "Oh, I'll take your closest 100 search and rescue folk, and then I'll take this chainsaw team over here, and then this mountain rescue team over here." Everybody is are those people. So you really have to be ready to respond to everything. But our when when we're when we're going through all of the flood work and all those flood modules, it's built off of the experience of the organization and of the people doing it. So all of our pictures, all of our techniques, everything's taught by people who've gone through those situations within the last couple of years, and myself included. It's funny when you go to a flood response, and I shouldn't say it's funny as in the situation is funny, but when you're taking a fire crew to a flood, and you're there and you're like, oh my god, there's so much water everywhere, why don't we have this when we're on the fire, sort of thing, and kind of getting that through your head as, right now I'm trying to push the water back or keep the water back. But then,
Mm.
tomorrow I could be trying to get as much of this as possible. And I've
Well,
been on flood work, and then the next day been on fires. Like we've seen lightning strikes while we've been on working a flood, and then the plumes go up and the smoke goes up, and then the next day we get shipped north to go to
yeah,
the fire. And these sort of cascading emergencies can happen,
exactly.
and you really have to be ready for it. But the great thing about wildfire crews, I think, and the way that where everybody is trained, it is that it's almost like the military, in that you can be deployed anywhere that there's a need for really good communications,
Mm.
being aware of resource requirements and communicating those resource requirements in advance, and then working hard as a team. And so, like, those three things can be applied to so many different situations. And as a incident commander, or a supervisor, or somebody in charge of handling one of those situations, if you were to say to me, I have 20 people who are self-sufficient, hardworking, physically capable, and will communicate to you with what they need if they need it. Do you want these people?
Mm.
You would say yes in a heartbeat. And
Yeah.
so, training fire crews, you could say it's training flood crews. You could say it's training search and rescue crews.
Wow.
I don't know that the name for the crew, for the people, really makes a difference. Obviously, the training does, but there's certain components, core to those groups, that are applicable across so many different emergencies.
Wow. Yeah, that is, and I think you've alluded to it a few times now, but like this versatility is just, it's a requirement of being so isolated. So how long does it take you to drive from one to the next town over, if I could ask?
No, of course. So Teslin is about an hour and a half south of us, and it has a population of about 1,000, I think.
Mm.
Carcross is 45 minutes away, and it's a population under 1,000. The next city that has, or the next community that has in the Yukon, that the next biggest population center, I think, is Dawson
Yeah.
or Watson Lake. Either way, Dawson is north, and that's about 5-6 hours north, depending on construction, of
Wow.
course. And then Watson Lake again is the same amount of time going south. And so that in itself brings up this other thing, is that there's only one way to get to places here, and that's via highway. And so as soon as the highway is compromised, whether by wildfire or washed out by flood, that's it. There's
Yeah.
no other way to get there. So understanding that this can happen, and obviously it's cheaper and more effective to transport equipment up the highway than it is to fly it anywhere.
Yeah.
um, if you can't do that, what do you turn to? What is your next play? What is your situation? So I think that's a big reason why we do, again, like you mentioned, we do have to be really versatile and be prepared to to make a different plan.
Great. So I have one final question for you. And it's really, you can take this any way you would like. But just hearing about your perspective, everything that you've brought today and you've talked about, in with a shifting climate, with more warm days in the Yukon than you guys have seen, pretty much ever in your long history of being there. What do you foresee as being the most difficult challenge for response in the future?
That's Man, there's so many answers to that. Climate change is destroying the way that we've classically been able to respond to emergencies, and it's happening faster and faster, even in the short period of time that I've been exposed to it. Our nights are getting warmer. The days are consistently long up here in the Yukon. There's something that many people might have heard who haven't been up here, but it's
Mm.
it's often called the land of the midnight sun,
Mm.
and that's a very real thing. We During the middle of the summer, we don't really get dark up in the Yukon. It
Wow.
is light. It gets to kind of like dusk at like 2 or 3 in the morning, but the sun is up again by 4:35, like ready to go. And so that affects overnight recoveries for wildfire, whereas down
Mm.
south you might have, you know, lower fire activity at night, and that's where you might go do your burn operations and what have you. And then when you come to a fire in the morning, you'll see like much lower fire activity. But up here in the Yukon, we've seen fires just pick up at night, which is kind of trippy in itself. But the climate change up here is like we feel that way more in the north,
Mm.
and we're seeing it
Yeah.
way more. And that's kind of honestly like a whole other conversation that could go on for so long. But I do want to speak to a couple of things
Mhm.
kind of that I think a lot of people I think are kind of applicable across the board and not just up here in the Yukon. The first one is I think that drones are going to become
Mm.
more and more prevalent across the board, both for really positive use, but also for personal use. And the more personal use that we see, these drone pilots aren't going to know about no TAMs or no fly zones, and we're going to see more drones. On top of and around emergency situations, and that's going to pose a serious threat to helicopters, bombers, other drones that are there for the right reasons. I think that's going to be a serious risk in the future more and more. I also think that disaster overlap is going to
Mm.
become more and more of a thing. What I mean by that is you have really crazy fires during the summer, and then during the winter, you have a really heavy snowpack and potentially landslides or avalanches because the mountainside doesn't have any root systems left. And then in the spring again, everything melts and then everything just comes off the hill, so communities are going to be impacted a lot more frequently, and it's going to be like boom boom, like that double hit
Yeah.
all within a year. And I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of that, especially in mountainous regions, because of you have that opportunity for things to happen. So you could have, in theory, you could have a fire one summer, and then the next spring you could have crazy mudslides, and then that following summer you could have a flood, and like all of these situations can happen around one area very easily. Further to that, I think the infrastructure destruction is going to be more prevalent everywhere because of these cascading emergencies and these disaster overlap. And it's going to take out, like I was mentioning, it's going to take out highways, it's going to take out bridges, and that's going to really have a big impact on people, both here in the Yukon and like elsewhere in Canada. And then finally, the last thing that I think is kind of the scariest for me in one way is misinformation
Mm.
about events and who to trust when an event happens and how and who to go to for that information and why an event is happening. I think more and more we're going to need to really step up our public education and our interaction with each other and with the community that we're in. And I think our role as emergency managers and as response specialists, and you know, in this industry, we really can't be sitting behind a desk and either doing it off the side of the desk, but only focusing on the computer screen in front of us. We really have to get out there and talk to people and make those connections. LinkedIn is great. Facebook is great. Social media has its values for what we do,
Yeah.
but that in-person connection and building those relationships before an emergency happens, so that when the shit hits the fan, we are there and we're ready and we trust each other. I think that's going to be the biggest part.
That is so well said. I agree with every single one of your points. I had not thought about drones and the response, and I think that in like right when you said, water bomber is just doing their job and then a drone goes anywhere near, that's a huge liability. Um, the second point you mentioned about the critical infrastructure, that's really one of the key lessons of hopefully this episode or maybe the next episode I talk about. But critical infrastructure within mountain regions and isolated communities is so much more critical, right? There is far less ability to recover it quickly. It has to be recovered or else people can't live there. and it's just reliant on. It's more relied on, I guess you could say. So those are brilliant answers, Nick. You've had these questions before come to you, so
Not only the questions, it's what we live. And
mm,
anybody who's truly passionate about the job and truly like really in it because they love it. I mean, this is what we do. So I mean, you know, I'm not here to pump myself up or the organization, although, I can if you want me to, but it really is a team effort. And that's one of the reasons I got into wildfire. I love finding success on my own, but finding success with a team is so much better. Celebrating a win with a team, finding success with a team is so much better, and that happens with your crew for fire and with your community. When you are working together to protect each other and you accomplish that, I mean, there's no greater feeling.
that, that is so well said. It's a team sport, and it has always been a team sport, and it will always be a team sport, no matter how much we want to rely on technology to do kind of replace some of these things that we're doing, make it easier for us. So very well said. Can you let people know where they can connect with you, or how to contact you, if they have any questions?
Yeah, for sure. I'm on LinkedIn. I didn't mean to bash it earlier, but you can find me, Nick Mauro, on LinkedIn. Happy to connect there. I'm also on Facebook if that's something that people want to reach out to me as.
Hmm,
And then you can reach out to my email is ceo@yfnw.ca, and I'm happy to collaborate.
excellent. Well, thank you again, Nick, for taking the time. The consideration you gave, some of the answers are just so thoughtful, and I think I learned so much. And that's part of this journey, is just being able to learn as much as we possibly can and share all this information with each other, and we'll be better for it. So I want to take a moment to thank you for everything that you've said, and everything that you've done, and everything that you're going to continue to do. Um, so thank you again.
Yeah, this has been awesome. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. And yeah, if anybody who's watching this, is inspired by what has been discussed here today, just know that you have the ability to do it too. It's really, everybody starts off not knowing anything and wanting to learn and find that next step. And we've all been there. So it's totally within the grasp of absolutely anything. You can do anything. So if you want to help, you can do it.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you again. And that is all we got for today. Later.